Thank you for tuning in to the SkillsAware podcast. We are a human-centered, AI-powered skills recognition engine transforming how people and organizations understand and grow their capabilities. Each episode features insightful conversations with industry leaders, experts, and innovators who share their knowledge, experiences, and ideas on workforce skills, skills recognition, skills literacy, artificial intelligence, and so much more.
Well, I'd just like to welcome everybody today to this webinar celebrating National Skills Week, which we do every year, and it gathers all of us together thinking about skills and the contributions that are made and the great success stories. So it's really good to be here with some new ideas, and I hope they're fresh ideas for you today. And I'm very pleased to welcome my colleague and co-founder of SkillsAware, Yasmin King. Yasmin, thanks for coming today. Look forward to hearing from you in a moment. But what I'm planning to do is start with a little bit of how we got here. We're actually doing things in reverse a little bit. We're going to talk about what we're doing and why, but then talk about the bigger picture after that, and then see where it fits in. And then that's when we're looking forward to hearing from everybody through the Q&A process. So what will happen is we'll have a presentation from me and a presentation from Yasmin, and then a good half hour of questions and answers and conversation. And we're very happy for people to share their ideas, and we want to hear from you in the Q&A process. So we all take away something of value today. So both Yasmin and I suffered from a little bit of colds, so please excuse our voices, but we're here and ready to go. So I'm just going to share my screen first, and we'll get going with the presentation. We've said we'll do a little demo today, which we're going to do, and but it's going to be short, and there's a much more comprehensive thing available. And what I would say at the beginning is we're just open to any follow-up conversations that might be relevant to anyone who's on the call today, and that includes a more in-depth look at the system and how it operates. And I'm hoping everyone can see that and that screen, and I'm just going to share that as a slideshow and make a start. But first of all, I would, as we all do, like to do is acknowledge that we're all meeting on various lands of our First Nations people, and all different. I'm not going to name them and so on, but we certainly acknowledge all the elders past and present, and we just understand the great 60,000-year history of skills and talent and culture that contributes so richly to Australia, and very happy to acknowledge the welcome we're all made to feel in these lands by our various First Nations cousins. So just to get started, I want to do a very quick version of how we got here, or how I got here. And again, happy to follow that up, because my journey to where we are today with SkillsAware and with this notion of empowering students comes really from a doctoral thesis that I did very quickly in the 90s. I founded an LMS company, which some of you will know as TechWorks, or now called WorldLearn. I then got to work at Monster.com in the US on this very problem of matching skills and jobs and working with occupations and so on, a very large scale role I had there, and then came back and started an RTO. So I ran my own RTO, and while I ran the RTO, I completed a doctorate, and I did a doctorate in the social theory of learning engagement with the internet, and the title was Towards Learning Utility. So I've been a passionate researcher and working on the notion of learning utility, in other words, usefulness, for more than 20 years, in fact, probably 30 years, to be honest. And just to explain that in other language, because it sounds a bit academic in a way, what does learning utility mean? Really what it means is are the programs and money and resources we spend thinking about learning, is it useful in the hands of the individuals? Is it useful in the hands of employers? And is it useful for society as a whole? And what's the internet impact on that? So that was my research. that led me next to the notion that, well, if we could validate skills, verify them, prove that people could do things, that would be great. So I followed down the whole blockchain path and certifying skills and so on. And then I struck what I think is a philosophical problem, and that is assessment is always subjective in the end. We do everything we can to make assessment objective, but it's always subjective in the end. So what can we do to improve objectivity and utility in empowering students and identifying skills and making sure that people really understood what they have? Some research I've done, and it's hard to find good research on this, suggests that there are about every person of any it's got their career going, can do about 800 to 1,000 things. And yet, how do you see that in your resume? And how do you recognize what you can do? Well, what we've worked on in SkillsAware is this model. This is our 4 pillars of our initiative here. We call SkillsAware service as software rather than software as a service, because it needs to be surrounded by human input, both at the beginning, assisting people who may not be skills literate or may not be technically literate to identify their evidence, and then at the end in helping people find recognition, be that through a resume or a qualification or just recognition of a competency. So this diagram just explains the process as simply as we can and where the real efficiencies lay. So what we do is we gather evidence into a funnel. It's done through a conversation with an AI agent. And I'm going to show that a little bit at the end of my little part of the talk. And then we move from there, and the AI does skills mapping or skills recognition. So what we've done is we've taken the 15,000 units of competency, 65,000 elements of competency, and we've turned them into machine readable defined skills. And they're still related. We've still got all the codes and so on. So they're not, we haven't changed them, but what we've done is made them machine readable and made them work more in a common English sense. And so you can map the evidence to the skills statements in some detail using AI. That is a huge productivity saver. So primarily what we're trying to do is make that whole problem of gathering and mapping evidence work. That's what we're doing. And the reason why we're doing it is because we want to increase the objectivity in the recognition of skills and learning and experience. The other thing we do is we put this in a very secure warehouse. So SkillsAware is not a complicated application. It's actually a fairly simple application. What's complicated is the security and the mapping and the way in which we create a library of skills. So as an individual, you could have a library of several hundred skills and have them available to you to use in whatever other purpose you want, including RPL. The last thing on here is the capability report and various other things that we can do. And so our first use case, and the one that we're doing our pilot programs on, and we've got 3 pilot programs underway with paying clients, which is great. And they are all involved in recognition of prior learning for either occupational recognition or qualifications under RPL. Another thing we can do, though, is increase skills visibility. And I'm not going to address that in any great detail, but if you have an organization who are all using our system, then you can create a visibility over skills and do an enterprise skills search and so on. Final thing to say is that we are bringing standards, interoperability standards to this more than anyone else I know in Australia. We are just really committed to making sure that the skills warehouse is available in as widely and as many different systems as possible, all in the aim of what I call learning utility. So who are the beneficiaries? So that's the what and the why. So here's the who. So we see that 2 primary audiences that we're serving is the individuals and the organizations who might employ them, but we're also meeting the needs of credential issuers. So this Venn diagram describes how the benefits accrue and how these 3 actors with our systems and our services get benefits. So for individuals, they can get recognition from a credential issuer, be that a university, an RTO, a regulator, or even auditors in a compliance system. So that's the value proposition for the individual. They're going to get recognition, and between them and their organization, they're going to get employment. And the employment's going to be based on skills-based hiring and skills-based resourcing, not on some kind of bizarre match using an applicant tracking system of a resume and a job description. My experience at Monster and my research says that both resumes and job descriptions are incredibly unreliable and are certainly not objective. So again, what we're trying to do is increase the objectivity in the employment relationship. The other side benefit, which is a lesser benefit for organizations, is that because it's an evidence-based system, if they're dealing with compliance, regulatory compliance, they've got the evidence of people's skills and capabilities. And that evidence can be updated and audited. And so this works well in an audit setting, in a regulatory setting as well. So that's the value proposition of what we're doing with SkillsAware. And you can see how that fits into this whole idea of empowerment, that we're empowering individuals, we're empowering organizations with these ideas, and we're also empowering the credential issuers to be able to operate more effectively and efficiently and cheaply. One of the things, I'm about to do a demo, but one of the things I want to explain is exactly what are we measuring. So what we're measuring, and this statement is very clear and needs to be understood, we're measuring the probability that the evidence provided is fit for purpose. So there's a high chance of success that the evidence provided is going to mean that you can issue a qualification, or you can recognize a compliance situation, or whichever the benchmark is. So that's a critical part of what we're doing. And the way that works, it's not an international standard, but it's becoming an international convention that there are three types of learning in the recognition world. There's informal learning, the self-claim that you've got experience, you've done something, but no third party has recognized it, or second party has recognized it either. So it's just what you claim you can do. Now, too often we don't recognize that, and that's a real opportunity for growth. And as long as the benchmark required is not does not preclude this, it's really useful to have a record of what you think you can do, and to do that in a systematic way. We're looking to increase the level of skills literacy to make that really effective, and that's going to take some time. The second one is organizational non-formal learning, and in that sense, we're looking at the things you do at work and as courses, but they're not formal. And the final part of this score, which you're going to see in the demo in a second, is a formal learning. There's a 50% of the score is related to things that you've actually formally gained as a license, or a unit of competency, or a qualification from a university, or some kind of industry or professional certificate or certification. All right, let's move to the demo. And now I'm going to switch screens, and that worked. So if we can just work with this screen now, I'm hoping everybody can see that. For many of you, this is the first look at SkillsAware. I've gone through the login piece. I didn't want to bore everybody with that. But there are really two functions in SkillsAware: discovering skills and viewing skills. And viewing skills is about seeing the archive of what you've got. Discovering skills is about the process of loading evidence and recognizing them as skills. I'm going to do this very quickly because of time constraints, but anyone who's interested, we can do this much more slowly and explain much more what you're seeing on another day. So I'm apologizing for speed here, but we're much more interested in getting your ideas. Here is that I'm scrolling back through is a conversation that our friend, now we've chosen, those of you who are old enough will remember Radar O'Reilly. Walter O'Reilly has left the army, and he wants to have his skills recognised and find new career pathways. So this conversation here is what Walter has said, and then SkillsAware has responded. Welcome to SkillsAware. It's an AI platform designed to help you identify, validate, and showcase your skills. The conversation here is between a artificial intelligent agent and Walter themselves, and the conversation occurs here. And there is an ability to use voice. We've discovered with some people it's a really useful thing. It's just accessibility question. You can use voice to do this. I'm not going to go through the whole conversation, but what I would say is that the AI has guided Walter, just like an assessor might, an RPL assessor might, in terms of saying, tell me more, what have you got, show me more, and so on and so forth. And then down at the bottom, it starts to summarize, aha, this is what we're going to focus on. Let's get started. And then right at the bottom here at the conversation, which leads to the next stage, what we've worked out is we deal with 5 competencies at a time. So the AI goes away and maps the evidence and narrative that Walter's provided to 5 competencies, and then Walter can come back and do another 5 competencies another time. So here's the 5 that have been identified, and you can what you do is ask the AI to add them to draft, and they're added into your draft skills box, which is over here. So let's just follow this one really quickly, and I've got a minute to go. So this is apply knowledge and risk management. It's come up with a score of 31%, which would indicate that there's some self-claim and some organizational claim skills. Down here is the evidence that Walter's provided, a resume, some certificates, a reference, a few things. And we go up here, and in the middle box here is the progress box. So Walter can work on this skill, can check on progress, add more evidence, and do things to improve the score. And the AI provides information. If you go away and get this or that, or these extra bits of information, you can improve your score. And then at some point, you're ready to update this onto the dashboard, update this skill. We're using the word badge at the moment. You'll see why, but we're going to change that, is update the skill onto the dashboard. Now, what does the dashboard look like? So over here, we're going to go to the view skills area. And here we can see, and this is working with our partners Edalex, who provided Credentialate. So behind this is the Credentialate technology. And you can see the badge for this unit of competency. And then we'll go past that. We can see the detailed elements. We can see that it's self and organization evidence that's contributed to the score. And Walter has a score of 31%, which they might want to improve. You can share, you can print, you can do all sorts of things with the detail. And here's the last thing we'll look at. Each of these links are links to actual evidence, so you can actually see the evidence that's been loaded. But over here is a detailed report, and this is what goes to an assessor. So an assessor in an RPL context can see this report, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it provides all of the reasoning that the AI has used. So all of the rationale for providing this score, reminding you that the score is the probability that the evidence provided is fit for purpose. Okay, I went 2 minutes over, but I did my best, and I hope that's generated some chat and some questions, and happy to come back to those afterwards. What I'd now like to do is just introduce Yasmin. I'll get back to the right slides and share the slideshow. And Yasmin, I did my best to make it on time, but over to you to put all of this in the broader context. So thanks, Yasmin.
All right. Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah. So that's the one you're expecting? Yeah.
No, but it's okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, that one. Look, thank you very much, Mark. I think I'd like to add that one of the things that we ensure is that no data is actually held in the AI agent. The data is actually securely stored in Open Aquila, which meets all privacy requirements, except data security requirements in Australia, because one of the things that I see a lot of is people saying that they're going to develop tools using ChatGPT, and that this will then mean you're going to be able to have a solution of doing RPL. Number one, you're putting personal data out into the greater wide world, so and so you better have had permission to do so, but also because at the end of the day it has to be a trained assessor who is the one who basically makes decisions. And that's one of the reasons why when we structured this about probability of the evidence meeting skills. So I just think it's worth emphasizing those. So how did SkillsIQ get involved? I mean, I suppose our journey journey was obviously having been involved as an SSO, and being intimately involved in the development of training packages, but also doing work internationally, particularly in Southeast Asia and also in Latin America. One of the things that really struck us is that while we always have criticisms of our system, there are so many things about our system that are incredibly well respected internationally. One is that it's a national system. Two is that it is one that has had in its history over the last 40 years a lot of industry involvement. And then the third thing that we've found is that it's incredibly granular. Now, if you're trying to train against that, that's very frustrating. But if you think about it in terms of data, that granularity is an enormous gift. And that was one of the reasons why when Mark and I got together along with Edalex, we said, well, how do we turn something that everybody thinks is a negative and actually see the opportunity? Because one of the things that's occurring with so many people in Australia who basically haven't got jobs, and at the same time we have lots of jobs and no people in it. So there's clearly a disconnect, right? So it was really about how can we solve this wicked problem, because just saying the answer is put people through training courses, because even with free, it's not achieving what needs to be achieved. So what do we need to do differently? So we spent a lot of time looking at what was happening internationally and have got very actively involved in the open recognition community for that reason, where you're really seeing a philosophy, particularly in Europe and increasingly in the US, of if we really want to give people opportunities, we need to work out how we can recognize what their life-wide skills are in addition to what they actually do as a job. Because if you think about skills literacy, people define themselves as the last job they had, right? I'm a shop assistant, I'm an accountant, I'm a construction worker, right? But people are so much more than their last job. And as Mark said, job descriptions are woefully inadequate. And interestingly, a lot of the data that's being used to measure what skills are needed are actually based on job descriptions. If you look at Lightcast, if you look at Burning Glass, it's all based on job descriptions. So they're not based on skills. And if we look at how many issuing qualification institutions there are in Australia, and how many training organisations they are, and then add to that the complexity of the latest thing of, everybody wanting to offer micro credentials. And while we've got a framework, it's a very high level framework. It actually doesn't have a lot of structure underneath it. So it's actually really confusing. It's a lot of white noise to somebody who's trying to determine, well, actually, has that person got the skills to do the job? Because ultimately, if you're employing somebody, that's what you want to know. And ironically, in a world of AI, where you've now got people writing perfect resumes and then AI evaluating the perfect resumes, what we're hearing more and more from employers is that actually the process of recruitment is getting harder and harder because they actually can't tell, who actually has got skills. So, and that's really why we've come at it from this, how do we deal with evidence, but also how do we give people opportunity to recognise what they already know, and how can we codify it? And so we've started with the Australian training packages, as Mark alluded to, but we've also tested it on other frameworks. Any capability framework can be input. We're doing work in other jurisdictions internationally, where obviously everybody wants to use their own coded skills definitions, and we can address that. But we started with the Australian training framework because it's the most, to be frank, it's the most comprehensive. It is the most granular, and it includes performance evidence and assessment evidence in it. So it's an amazing set of data. And while we talk about high level need to, like people being able to say, I have got communication skills, I've got teamwork skills, how do you provide evidence of that? Everyone can write a CV to say that they meet that in their job description. But if you can then go one step further and provide evidence of that, it takes you away from being a single track person based on what your job history has been to so much wider, because you can include your life-wide experience. Think about people who volunteer, for example. Often they never put anything about what they've actually done in their volunteering other than to say, I volunteer for, say, an animal shelter. But then if you actually had a mechanism for them to identify what they do in that volunteer role and then further provide evidence of it, then that then becomes a different amount of broader skills that they can add to who they are. And it can be very specific because it has an evidence base to it. Can you go to the next slide, please, Mark? So we talk a lot about how things are moving to skills-based hiring. And this is obviously a big trend internationally. You've got examples of governments internationally who've actually moved away and said, we no longer require qualifications. Instead, what we're doing is mandating skills. But actually, Harvard did a recent study to show that while that is a really strong narrative, in fact, the evidence is people still gravitate towards the old techniques of, still based on what's your qual, what's your job description. And so it's a cultural change, but it's definitely occurring and increasingly so. And I think one of the things that we, in sort of looking at what might the future hold, and while I have a lot of criticism for people who say, these are the jobs that you should be doing, remembering it was only probably 4 or 5 years ago, we were telling every kid, go learn coding, we're going to do Python workshops. And now it's like, oh, actually, that's all irrelevant because AI can whip that up. So, predicting the future is incredibly problematic. So it's better to actually think about what are the things that AI is not going to be able to do. And that are a lot of those people-based skills. But what we need is then a mechanism for how do you measure what those people-based skills are. And I suppose if I think about it in the context of where things may go with the way AI is evolving, is it might mean that we don't have jobs per se. Instead, we have more project-based work, and people will be assembled on the basis of what their skills are. And so it will be about what your skills are that matter and not about your titles. And that'd be my attempt at saying what I think the future might look like, instead of saying to anybody's kids, this is what you should be doing. So can I get you to go to the next slide, Mark?
No, I missed one. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. So I suppose if I were to summarize, I'd say that, look, our focus is really to try and get people to think about doing things differently and recognizing people's skills without saying your only solution is for you to go and do a full course. The reality is that while the course might be free, you've got to think about opportunity cost. You've got to think about, have people got the time capacity to still continue to meet their financial obligations as well as going and doing a course, even if it's free. It's also about, if you've come from another country and you've done something at a high level, what that feels like in terms of your own confidence and values. If you're being told, well, we're not recognizing any of that, you've now got to go back to a base of zero and do something at a much lower level, and is probably far beyond your capacity and capability in order for you to get a much lower job we've got all of this untapped potential out there of people who are operating at what I would say is below their scope of practice. And I know that one of the reasons that people say, RPL is really hard, it's easier just to get people to do the course. is also because of an income opportunity, because, we've commoditized education. It's really tough being a training organisation and making money. Totally get that. But what's really interesting is in some of the international examples that we know where they've adopted this approach, is what they've found is by allowing people in and recognizing what they've already got and shortening the opportunity of the courses that they do. So it's really basically identifying the gaps and what they need to do. And also therefore reducing the price of that is actually brought more money to the education institutions, because they've increased the cohort that they're able to attract. And then that cohort, often because they've now had the confidence to actually achieve something, have then gone on to basically do further study. So it's not about cannibalizing your income. We would argue it's about increasing your income opportunities. So I hope that's been useful. And we're more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And please excuse my voice. It is, I've suffering from a bad bout of asthma. And I like to say that I think I sound sexy, but apparently all of my team tell me that that is absolutely not the case. But,
Yeah, I think you sound fantastic, Yasmin, and thank you for that great overview. And as you'll see in the chat, we'd encourage people to add some questions now. We've got a really good period ahead of up to half an hour to really just explore some deeper ideas. And I just did a scan of all the people who've come, and we appreciate your attendance. So please make the most of this time by asking some questions, and we'll try and just offer some overviews. And then any follow-up we can do afterwards. So to start with, a great question. Thank you, Ron. The first question is, which I think I might take, is therefore, are you developing a skills taxonomy for the recognition warehouse? Well, we have one, and it does raise the question of what is a taxonomy. It's interesting that there's a couple of people on the call who are not in the Australian context, but in the Australian context, there's a desire to develop a new national skills taxonomy, and that's a project that is underway. We think that as we've said in the presentation, that the depth of data and the history of the training package skills, let's call it a taxonomy, it's so big that it means you can work with it from a data point of view. And so the question is, why would you want a taxonomy? So from my perspective, taxonomies are out in the learning, think about this, the learning utility context. Taxonomies are about meaning. Like, how do we make something meaningful to someone so that they can identify with it and then record it and show some evidence and then operate with meaning? Some of the work that's going on with taxonomies, I think, is trying to simplify skills to the point where they stop being useful. Like if you're recognizing general skills, there is a bit of a question about whether they're useful in the employment or compliance type settings that we've talked about. We think the greatest use for skills is not just having a qualification for its own sake, but for your employment context, whether it's as a contractor or an employee, or some other structure, and we have all of these structures these days, or from a compliance point of view to demonstrate compliance, regulatory compliance. If you get too general, you can't achieve that. So that's why we chose to work with, and it took a lot to get this 65,000 granular skills and 70,000 users competency. Those numbers move around a bit depending on who you're talking to, but anyway, close enough. Into our system as machine readable data. Now, there's a lot of duplication, as we know, and that's another question that comes up with SkillsAware. How do we avoid duplication? But that's not all bad. As long as something is there, you can map to it and you can find a way of harmonizing the data. I think there's a lot of high-level desire to make things simpler because there's a sort of small p political imperative to sort of make things easier to understand. But I don't actually think that's the problem. I think the problem is the utility of it, and therefore we're very cautious about taxonomies. We also think that what we've built into the system is the ability to use different frameworks. So one of the ones we're looking at in the near future is, for example, the International Sophia framework, which is used by a lot of engineering and software companies, highly technical companies, as a capability or skills framework in their organizations. It aligns neatly with various HR systems and job description management systems. And we think Sophia is a really good framework, and we want to work with that. We have a couple of customers who are talking about whether we might be able to use the Sophia framework. It's used extensively in the Australian Public Service. I just want to acknowledge the work Grant Nicholson does in that world. He's a really smart guy, and we really enjoy the conversation with him. So taxonomies, yeah, let's be careful. Let's not try and meet some kind of pseudo small p political imperative around simplicity, when in fact what's needed is compliance and so on. I hope that helps with that. Yasmin, you got any comment on that?
I suppose the only thing I would add is also, and it gets down to this, we want to make everything like, let's have, let's talk about communication and say communication, but communication is also about context, right? In the health setting, communicating with somebody who's dying is very different from communicating somebody sitting in the office next to you. So context is absolutely critical. And I think that's what we see in the granularity. And yes, there's definitely repetition, but that's the beauty of AI. You can have, that is all eliminated because it is able to determine where it's exactly the same in units, or where it has a different contextual difference. So yeah, I think I know, having attended some of the early workshops when they were going through the taxonomy thing, many questions were asked on what is the problem you're trying to solve. And the comment was, actually, no, that's not a valid question. That's not in our terms of reference. This is what we're doing. So, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and my concern too was that the consultant I talked to didn't understand the notion of metadata. And so I just want to make sure, like, this is an information science problem, right? It's not a kind of, not trying to make the language simple. What we're trying to do is make the process useful. And so we need to have people, the top kind of information scientists on the job. So on to another question. Thanks for this, Deb. I love how I can improve my score functionally. I have a technical question. If I want to investigate another 5 units, will the AI revisit my already uploaded evidence? Because there'll be commonalities across those units. Yes is the answer. And we're in the middle of testing how that is in reality. So, but any improvements we do to the system will be actually all be about this. How do we make sure that once you load the evidence, it's useful for all of your work? We suspect in our early pilots, people are going to be targeting not hundreds of skills, but enough to get a qualification or reach a skill set requirement. That's the indication we're getting from the marketplace. That's the desperate need. And without going into some examples of those pilots, because some of those projects are a little bit more confidential, but they're the sorts of things where there's unmet needs or actually regulatory issues, and also where there's change, where people are moving from not having needed a qualification to now needing one. And so we think people are going to want to work with about 20 to 30 units of competency in any kind of session. So, but still, that's 5 or 6 lots of 5. So 4 or 5, 6 lots of 5. So yes, it does recognise the evidence. Any comment from you, Yasmin, on that?
No, that's, yeah.
Yeah. I've got another question, but keep some questions coming. We have some time. So please, if you've got something you'd like to ask, please don't be shy. This next question, beyond self-awareness, how does SkillsAware help students translate their identified skills into formal qualifications and credits, and particularly in a way that's ASQA compliant in terms of their standards? Yasmin, you might be interested in commenting on that.
So obviously, we have been designing and testing the system with full cognizance of what the ASPA requirements are, and also the new RTO standards, which were put into effect at the 1st of July. But at the end of the day, it has to be the trainer and assessor who is the one who makes the final judgment. And that's how it should be. Because at the end of the day, it is that organisation that is the one that is responsible. And so outsourcing it to an AI agent would be certainly a risk that if I was running an ITO, I wouldn't be prepared to take. What we're about is basically trying to improve the productivity of the process. And all of our design has been frameworked along what the requirements are from an ASQA perspective and also RTO standards perspective.
Thanks, Yasmin. Yeah, that's really clear. We don't want to overstate what we're trying to do. And you know what, I'm going to stop sharing this screen because I think you've got that. Yasmin and I look good, and if you haven't copied down our emails or phone numbers if you want them, then now's, you've got 1 second left. Go. I've got another question here, which I think is really important. What is the process for a registered training organisation to partner with SkillsAware? What are the typical costs and implementation timelines involved? Well, I'm going to start with this, but Yasmin may have a comment. I'm working with a RTO based in the ACT at the moment on this very question, and the process for a long-term relationship with an RTO is that we will partner with them and they will engage with the students. So we don't get in between that relationship. We can deal direct with students, but our preferred model is to either deal with an enterprise or industry or profession or with an RTO. And we have slightly different models for each of those things. With an RTO, because they are the assessor, we aren't. We want to have a good intimate relationship with them and a good partnership that lasts a long time. So the one we're planning at the moment in Canberra is planning to operate with a pilot program first, so that we can train their staff in how the system provides them with evidence and how to look at the evidence. And also we can work with their client users who are going to be adding, or learners who are going to be adding evidence to the system, and make sure that the workflows work in those situations. So that involves an implementation fee on our part and also the RTO's part. In the case of the clients that they're considering working with in the pilot, they're very happy with this because they can immediately see the efficiencies. So this is the other point is we know that if we're not saving the RTO money and saving the client money, then we're not doing what we've set out to do. So while it's a fee to work with us, and the fee structures varies, and it's a little bit settling down. Some of that's because we use Microsoft as Azure and a version of ChatGPT in the background, and those pricings keep changing. So the fee does move around a bit, but it's going to be a sum, like a 2-figure small sum, if you like, a Netflix-y type fee per month for the user, probably annualized, and then probably worked with as a voucher. So an RTO might buy seats or a voucher, and then buy an extra lot of vouchers and so on. So normal kind of, not subscription, but normal voucher type or seat-based licensing. That's how that will work in practice. What the actual costs are, we're just settling that down at the minute, but they're not exorbitant, and we've done significant research on the pricing of RPL in Australia, and also the cost of managing RPL in Australia, and our annual cost for the per learner is really, and compared to the saving it's going to make to the RTO, it's a very significant thing. I don't want to put percentages on it, but you know, we are looking at a 60% type, 50-60% type improvement in productivity and therefore saving. So these numbers are significant. They're not finalised or nailed down or properly researched just yet, but I'm happy to give those indicators just to help. Yasmin, any further thoughts on that?
No, I mean, when you say it's the reason, as Mark said, is not that we don't know what our costs are. It is the Microsoft question, I have to say, that is making it really difficult to lock down our pricing, because that is an evolving scope. So we also really want to make this accessible, because I mean, I suppose ultimately, and where we think, or where we sit philosophically, is ultimately we think individuals need to own their own evidence and learning journey. And because if we really think that people are going to basically continuously, adopt a lifelong learning approach, then they need to hold that responsibility. And if I think about, for myself, in my professional capacity as a director or a CPA, I mean, I'm the one who's responsible for updating my data, making sure that I meet my commitments in order for me to retain my accreditation. And it works because I know that, right? And I think that if you do impose something top down, where we've done that in Australia, and I mean, like, let's just use my health record, for example, or I think Monique Ryan recently quoted about the recent specialists transparency data website that cost something like $20 million to set up. And there are currently 20 specialists who have recorded their evidence of their costs on it, right? The problem, you need to have individuals own the responsibility and own their journey. Okay, so it's how do you enable that? And so while we work with organisations, we're working with organisations who recognise the benefit of the individuals basically retaining that information and knowledge.
Just on that cost question too, we are early, right? So if anybody's got a link for us, we're interested in pilots. We're being as generous as we can be within our own cost framework in these early days to just get people involved and make sure what we're doing is market driven. It's not just driven by a group of boffins trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, but we want to make sure every step we make is driven by the needs in the marketplace. Another question, and thanks, Ron. Do we work with industry employers for using this model for recruitment or workforce skilling, given the skills approach? Yeah, well, I'm going to speak to some things we're doing in Canada, actually. Australia and Canada have so many things in common, a lot of differences too, fortunately. We have desert and they have snow, but one of the things we have in common is a lot of space and a lot of resources. And in Canada, the problem problem here is that people are moving from old-fashioned manufacturing to advanced manufacturing and mining and other things, and there are regional factors in all of that. And just thinking about the story in Whyalla in the northern part of the Spencer Gulf in South Australia, among other places where there's populations needing new jobs, those sort of situations, well, they exist in Canada too. So we're working in Canada, looking at projects both in British Columbia and Manitoba, where forestry workers leaving that industry and moving into mining. It's very specific projects. So we've got advanced conversations going there without being too specific, looking at that direct thing and actually taking, in both Manitoba and British Columbia, they have a mining competency framework, and we're looking at taking that, absorbing that framework in and doing statewide projects there actually, and so that's very interesting. We can say that one of our early pilot projects that we are doing, which is not got a lot of publicity, but it's not a secret, is we're working with the SA Skills Commission on transitioning people into they've got a new occupational recognition service, and we're working with them on a pilot program to transition veterans into the skill shortage areas in South Australia, and that project's just kicked off, and we're looking forward to seeing the results of that later in the year. So, industry, employers, large employers who've got specific needs, we've got several of those conversations going on. I don't know, Yasmin, have you got anything to add to that from your examples? Yeah.
Look, I mean, mine's still, I mean, the two projects I'm working on are confidential, so I can't discuss who the client is, but it is a case where what they've found is they've got a lot of people who have extensive experience but no qualifications, and there's now increasingly requirements for those people to have qualifications, and there is no capacity for them to go and do the qualification. So it's basically about how do we recognise the fact they've been doing this for 20 odd years, and codify that evidence so that they can be RPL'd. And I think that's going to increasingly happen. I mean, if I think about the childcare register that, is being floated, imagine how much more effective it would be if, in fact, every individual childcare worker owned their own requirements and evidence, right? Because then, if it's in the hands of, say, an employer or a third party, you're reliant as somebody who has to get work in often a very casualised labour market of someone else basically making sure they've done all the work to update it and maintain it. And if they haven't, that could be the difference between you working tomorrow and not working. Whereas if you have that responsibility and you own it, okay, then that control then is in your hands.
I've got another question here, which is a more technical question. How can SkillsAware integrate with our existing learning management or student management systems and create a seamless student journey? Well, the funny thing about learning management systems and student management systems is very few of them create a seamless student journey. They're two of the least popular systems for students there are, and I can say that from 30 years of experience in implementing them. It's really tough to get people to enjoy using those systems, and yet they are part of our reality. And so SkillsAware fits in the middle. We don't seek to replace or change those systems. What we do is bring efficiency to them so that those systems are better backed by evidence. So from a learning management system, we can take the outputs in some kind of form, even just a CSV file from Excel we can deal with. And in terms of student management system, we can send data back into a student management system as long as they've got an appropriate API and so on. But SkillsAware is different, as we've demonstrated. It's about evidence. Learning management systems do provide some evidence, but it's not evidence that's often compliant with the ASCA rules and ASCA requirements. And student management systems are just repositories, but they don't ever reference evidence, and we think they should. So one of the ways a student management system can reference the evidence and make it fully auditable is actually to work with SkillsAware, because we're keeping the data and the evidence in a secure repository, and that makes the whole thing gives greater integrity to the whole system. So that's how that works. We've got time for another question if someone's got one. That would be great. Anybody got something they want to ask? And if not, we can consider wrapping up with a few minutes to spare.
How can you link this given student management systems to the USI? Mark, that's a data question. That's for you.
Yeah, so the USI is just we actually can read the PDF report. So that's how we do that. So if someone's got a USI, that's valid evidence of the qualification. It's formal evidence. And so our system would recognize a USI report as formal evidence. That's a bit of a circular loop in a way, because they probably have got their USI because they've been in a student management system. And so we're sending back to a student management system that they've already got, but at least we can transport that as formal evidence. So yeah, a USI is formal evidence in our system, as would be a certificate from a registered RTO or a qualification with an academic transcript from a higher education organisation. They're all formal evidence that the system recognises.
I should also add, look, one of the reasons why we're doing pilots is because, we basically have taken this approach of having a continuous improvement approach on the development of the product. We did our first version with real users and very quickly identified that what we thought people's skills literacy was significant less than what the actual reality was. So that meant that we then immediately recast it, doing a lot more work on the user interface, and that's why it's much more about basically trying to help people articulate what they have, because you get everything. One project we're working on, if I think about, chefs, you get everything from somebody who says, I'm a chef and here's all the evidence of the last 10 jobs I've worked in and, the type of things that I've did, and here's all the references, and here's, every restaurant I've worked at and the evidence, etc. And then you'll get somebody else who'll say, I'm a chef. And that's it. So you get everything in between, right? And they're not able to articulate much more than that, because as I said at this in my part, people often just think I'm my job title, right? So one of the things we've done is spend a lot of energy and effort on that USI, because you need to be able to cater for both ends of the spectrum. And in moving forward, we also understand, there's going to be language issues. There's going to be people are going to want to upload, video evidence, etc. So our whole approach is to basically you work with people, identify what their needs are from a real user perspective, and then basically continually upgrade and improve what we're doing. And for me, I think that's why we became actively involved in this project, was because for us, in the thing about SkillsAware is we've brought together people who actually have different but extraordinarily complementary skills, but also the same values, as opposed to a lot of the tech that I have seen, which is very much, I've got a technology solution and now I'm going to try and make it fit what your problem is. What we've all done is come to it like, we can see what the wicked problem is. How do we then bring our broad set of skills to solve that real problem? Instead of, here's a bit of tech and let's try and retrofit it.
Yeah, and I think we just want to compliment all the relationships here. SkillsIQ's experience is fantastic. I've been around a long time and experienced a lot of things, but Edalex in particular have a terrific platform framework, and they also work with a number of other providers with the technologies they've driven. So they've got a great tech stack. So we're very confident moving forward in the future. So yeah, well, we're going to bring this to a close, I think, a couple of minutes early, but unless there's any more questions, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance. Thank you, Yasmin, for getting your voice, at least it survived the time.
Yes.
And also to the team who've put this together. So thanks very much. And I'm not sure what happens with this, because I know it just cuts you off if you get to the hour, but I think we've covered the ground today, and thank you for the nice compliments in the chat, and we look forward to an ongoing conversation with everyone who's been here today.
And please reach out to us if you want to talk offline. The one thing that Mark and I are very happy to always do is chat, let me tell you.
Yeah, we do that ourselves a fair bit, don't we, Yasmin? So, yeah, very good. Now, we've got people in the background who can help us sign out, so we're really done now. So thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for tuning into this SkillsAware podcast episode. Don't forget to follow us on your podcast app so you don't miss a thing, and be sure to visit our website at skillsaware.com to learn more.